Greetings, friends, and welcome once again to the Creation Soapbox, brought to you by your friends here at abitoforange.com. Today we're looking at evolutionary mechanism number 5, mutations. Mutations are misspellings. What about mutations? Do they add information? Do they turn turtles into ninjas? Jeez, I hope so. The quote I'm about to show you comes from theweek.com in an article called Why You Should Stop Believing in Evolution. Now, you might think because of that title, oh, this is somebody who shares this creationist viewpoint. No, the reason why he thinks you should stop believing in evolution is because evolution is not a faith, it's a fact. You should just know evolution. That was the entire point of this article. And yet, here's what he says about mutations. Genes stored in every cell are the body's blueprints. They code for traits like eye color, disease susceptibility, and a bazillion other things that make you you. All right, so far so good. Reproduction involves copying and recombining these blueprints, which is complicated, and errors happen. Note the word errors. Errors are passed along in the code to future generations, the way a smudge on a photocopy will exist on all subsequent copies. So this guy, who is telling you that evolution is a fact, you shouldn't believe it, you should just know it, it's a fact, has explained that mutations are like a smudge on a photocopy. They are errors. And yet, errors and smudges are supposed to create new genetic information? How does that work out in the real world? Here is Julian Huxley from Evolution in Action. He says, one would expect that any interference with such a complicated piece of chemical machinery as the genetic constitution would result in damage. And in fact, this is so. The great majority of mutant genes are harmful in their effects on the organism. So if you have a turtle and you give it mutations, the great majority of those turtles are going to be sick or dead. Here is H.J. Mueller from Radiation Damage to Genetic Material, an American scientist. But mutations are found to be a random nature, so far as their utility is concerned. According to the great majority, certainly well over 99% are harmful in some way, as is to be expected of the effects of accidental occurrences. So the admission here is that genetic information is complex. It's like the code that runs your operating system. If you just go in and start making random changes, you're going to do damage. Maybe you'll get lucky and you won't see any difference, but probably you're going to get the blue screen of death. Or in this case, you might kill your turtle. Not a whole lot of ninjas getting made that way. No, not outside of Hollywood. One great example of a mutation that we can actually observe is sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia is a hereditary blood disorder characterized by red blood cells that assume an abnormal rigid sickle shape. Sickling decreases the cell's flexibility and results in a risk of various life-threatening complications. So, your turtle's not turning into a ninja with this mutation. The gene defect is a known mutation of a single nucleotide. So, just to give you an idea of what that's like, a nucleotide is one of the letters in the DNA alphabet. And so you've got a gene that codes for whatever it is. Genes are pieces of DNA that code for proteins that create the structures of the cell, which create tissues that create organs, etc., etc. So a gene is kind of like a phone number that's, say, 1,000 numbers long. So if you dial it correctly, you get through and you get to order a pizza. But in this case, if you dial one of those digits wrong, you could die. Just to show you that this is not an isolated case where there's just this one gene that if you screw it up one way, no, there's a variety of ways to get very little change in the DNA to cause life-threatening or potentially deadly changes just in the genes that create blood. Beta thalassemia is a blood disorder that reduces the production of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the iron-containing protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen to cells throughout the body. So that's the whole purpose of red blood cells, is to carry oxygen. If you damage the hemoglobin, you now can't carry oxygen, and the body can't get the oxygen it needs, and that's at least going to damage if the person survives. More than 250 mutations in the HBB gene have been found to cause beta thalassemia. Most of the mutations involve a change in a single DNA building block, nucleotide, within or near the HBB gene. So to go back to my metaphor, that's like dialing that long phone number one digit wrong. Other mutations insert or delete a small number of nucleotides in the HBB gene. In people with beta thalassemia, low levels of hemoglobin lead to a lack of oxygen in many parts of the body. Affected individuals also have a shortage of red blood cells, anemia, which can cause pale skin, weakness, fatigue, and more serious complications. People with beta thalassemia are at an increased risk of developing abnormal blood clots. So just talking about the production of red blood cells, there are at least 250 mutations, like sickle cell anemia, where a single letter change can cause damage and harm, which leads to sickness and disorder. This is what mutations do. Mutations are not the hero. Some well-known inherited genetic disorders include cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, Tay-Sachs disease, phenylketonuria, and color blindness, among many others. All of these disorders are caused by the mutation of a single gene. We have more than 20,000 genes in our DNA, but you mutate any one of those, and there's a laundry list of potential diseases and harm that will come as a result of that. And even according to the true believers in evolution over at evolution.berkeley.edu, only pop culture could have created Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Mutations could not have done it. Let me summarize what they've just said. Mutations which we believe turned rodents into monkeys and turned monkeys into people, some of whom are ninjas, could not have taken a turtle and mutated it into the point where it became a ninja. So, monkey, which came from rodent, which came from fish, that could evolve through mutations up to the point where it's a ninja. But turtles? No. Mutations could not have done that. Very sad. It's kind of hoping for heroes in the half shell. That's all I wanted. Sorry, Michelangelo. You're just gonna have to just study karate as a hobby. Not gonna be a career choice. Here's my metaphor. Will errors in printing create new cards? If the printer makes enough errors on the existing cards, will it produce the Archduke of Hearts? No, it will just ruin the other cards. Errors are far more likely to destroy information than to produce information. Will mutations create new information? The odds against mutations creating new genes is so great that it is, for all practical purposes, impossible. Like a tornado plowing through a trailer park and assembling a functional 747 from the pieces. Also, tremendously important to note is that a beneficial mutation that adds new genetic information to a genome has never been observed. The only beneficial mutations we have ever seen have been deletions and in some cases duplications. And a duplication is just literally that when a gene is copied, instead of one copy of the gene, it copies two of the gene. Now that'll have an effect, but again, copying something and making something that didn't previously exist are not the same thing. But it gets worse. There's genetic entropy. Contamination of the genome by very slightly deleterious mutations. Why have we not died 100 times over? This is the name of an article from the Journal of Theoretical Biology from 1995. Genetic entropy is this. We are constantly gaining mutations. Now, it's true that a single nucleotide can cause damage and potentially death, but there's a lot of places, because we have billions and billions of nucleotides, where one change might not do anything that we notice. But like a smudge on a photocopy, it stays with us. And then the next generation inherits that smudge, they inherit that mutation. Well then, they gain a few mutations just through random accidents throughout their lifetime. They pass that on to the next generation. Over time, the smudges on the photocopy make the photocopy unreadable. In the case of genes, what happens is, what we refer to as neutral mutations, meaning they don't have an effect, good or bad, they pile up. And eventually they become harmful. Eventually they kill whoever inherits that many. The genetic load of mutations becomes too much and it becomes deadly. So here's a scientist looking at how fast we collect mutations. And then he's saying, well, if we're collecting mutations at this rate, and the human race, on the evolutionary theory, has been here for 100,000 years or more, why is our species not gone extinct more than 100 times by now? Because the rate at which we gather mutations is high enough that if we had been here for 100, 200,000 years, at the present rate, we should have gone extinct more than 100 times already. This is another example of new genetic science showing that evolution is impossible. The timeline cannot happen. Otherwise, we have to believe that for inexplicable reasons, we've only just started gaining mutations recently. Even just within the species of modern humanity, because if our ape ancestors had also been gathering these mutations, they would have gone extinct before we could have evolved. The evolutionary story does not fit the facts that we know, and here's another glaring example of that. The relentless net effect of random mutations, which evolution is supposed to be the engine of evolution, is actually degradation or complete destruction of function. Admittedly, this is from a creationist, but he's making the point that the evolutionist above is making, and what the evolutionists in previous quotes are making. Mutations, as far as we have ever observed, mutations are errors. They are damage. They are destruction. They don't create new information. They destroy information that already existed. Well, what about deleting or duplicating information? Will that create the Archduke of Hearts? Will printing 2 of the Queen of Hearts create the Archduke of Hearts? Will failing to print the Jack of Hearts create the Archduke of Hearts? Obviously, the answer is no. So in our metaphor here, each of the cards is a gene. Well, to create a new gene, and therefore create a new kind of animal or plant, duplicating is not going to be enough. So can mutations add new branches to the Darwinian tree of life? Errors have never been seen to add new genes, and without new genes, new kinds of plants and animals cannot exist. They can't come into being. Copying or deleting genes in a bacteria will never produce a wolf or a cabbage. Evolution has failed. Mutations don't help evolution, they don't cause evolution, they don't grow new branches. This is just another proposed mechanism that does not get the job done. So in summary, the mechanisms of evolution all fail to cause the growth of the Darwinian tree of life. Natural selection only removes variations, it does not create any new ones. Changes in allele frequency don't add new alleles, though they might remove some. Vestigial organs and structures show that branches have been cut off the tree. They show where something has been lost, but this can never gain anything new. And mutations are damage done to existing information. Mutations have never been seen to create new information, and realistically speaking, they never could, just as smudges on a photocopy will never write the next great novel. The final verdict? Darwin has failed. There are no mechanisms that grow the Darwinian tree of life. There are only mechanisms which cut branches off of that tree. Darwin's tree is dead wood. Next time we're going to take a look at biblical creation and see how creation is the faith that fits the facts, while evolution, as you've seen, is the faith that the facts have failed. Well, I hope you've come to understand that when properly understood, evolution is bankrupt, it's dead in the water, it's paper thin and an inch tall, and it is no threat to faith in the Bible. I hope you've enjoyed this bit of orange, and if you want more bits of orange, check us out at abitoforange.com. Thanks for watching, and as always, remember, Jesus loves you.